Hey there, guys. Alright, today we are back with some more overly sarcastic productions. If I have timed this right, this should be releasing on Halloween. I think, maybe, hopefully I did things right. Hopefully I timed things properly. This is their Halloween special on the Wild Hunt. Before we dive in though, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I would love it if you joined the Discord and followed me over at Twitch. Today we're repping, already, mainly because I'm fucking lazy. So, maybe next year, I'll fucking do Anakin. I don't know. That one's such a pain in the ass to put on. This is their video on the Wild Hunt, a miscellaneous myth and Halloween special in one. The Wild Hunt certainly, I would say, for the modern person, largely popularized due to The Witcher 3, because literally in the title, Witcher 3, The Wild Hunt. So I'm curious if Red will be talking about the Witcher series at all, because that does play a pretty important part, very significant to Zirel's story. And well, Geralt as well. But yeah, let's just go ahead and dive right in. Let's stop wasting time, huh?
Happy Halloween, everybody! Now, as you know, I generally do special spooky episodes in honor of the world's best holiday, and more specifically, I usually cover a classic work of great horror fiction. Unfortunately, I kinda ran out. I mean, there's more horror books out there, but once you've covered Dracula, Frankenstein, Lovecraft, Poe, and Jekyll and Hyde, the great seminal works of horror fiction start getting a little thinner on the ground and a lot less interesting. Now, I was planning on breaking the formula anyway by covering a much more subtle creepy classic.
Oh shit, so this is... Well, obviously, the day I upload this, if I time this right and upload it on Halloween, that means she'll be releasing this year's Halloween special. So I wonder what she'll be doing it on this year. I feel like I'm about to sneeze. I'm trying not to sneeze. Okay, I think I got it under control.
The Count of Monte Cristo, a harrowing exploration of trust, betrayal, and the transformative poison of revenge. But it's really long. Like, really, really long. Like, basically as long as my copy of Journey to the West. So unfortunately, I couldn't finish it in time. But it's probably fine to leave it on the shelf for a year or 14. I'm sure it won't get mad and...
Okay, so Count of Monte Cristo might be this year's Halloween special.
We're tortuous vengeance about it. Instead, let's dip into folklore and talk about something really in the spirit of the season. Spirits of the season. Specifically, the folkloric Wild Hunt, a delightfully spooky staple concept in European folklore with suspiciously ancient roots. Now, the Wild Hunt is officially classified as a folklore motif in the Stith-Thompson Index of Folkloric Classification, a thing that I am desperately happy exists.
What the fuck is that thing? So it's like an index of all folklore?
It sounds like a joke from an urban fantasy story.
Code E221, E221, we got a dead wife haunting husband on his second marriage.
Anyway, the Wild Hunt is...
That was a good one. That was a good one, Red.
Officially motif code E501, a ghostly hunter and phantom entourage pursuing an eternal phantasmal chase through the night. Frequently connected with the sound of howling winds and other such creepy nighttime noises, the Wild Hunt invisibly storms through the sky, hunting an ever-elusive prey and often doing very unpleasant things to anyone who doesn't get out of their way fast enough. Plus, if there was ever a year to stay indoors, this is probably it. The Wild Hunt concept was first officially codified by Jacob Grimm of the Brothers Grimm during his studies of German folklore.
The other Grimm.
When he noticed a super recurrent motif of a ghostly hunt through the night. Variously called the Wild Hunt, the Raging Host, and the Wild Army, the names can change, but the concept stays the same. Where some ghosts haunt individually, the Wild Hunt is a veritable ghost tornado, a screaming storm of the unhallowed dead, forever barred from their rest and cursed in death to ride eternal. And though Grimm was specifically studying German folklore, the Wild Hunt is found all over Western Europe and beyond, even contributing to the American folkloric concept of the Ghost Rider. Yes, that one. Now, Jacob Grimm, a comparative mythologist after my own heart, believed that a lot of these fairy tale staples had ancient pagan origins. And while that theory is often a little bit hokey, the fact that a lot of the fairy tales about the Wild Hunt specifically credit Odin as its leader lends some pretty solid credence to that theory. See, back in the Old Norse days, Odin had a ghost posse of his own, the Einherjar, ghostly warriors.
Army of one, those who fight alone. Chosen warriors housed in Valhalla, sometimes referred to as adopted sons of Odin. Father, of the slain.
Brought to Valhalla by the Valkyries to eternally train for the final battle of Ragnarok. With Odin and his Valkyrie cohort leading them, the Einherjar ride out onto the fields of Vigridr for the battle that ends the world. And even post-Christianization, Odin and his Einherjar were still a very popular concept. 10th century Norwegian king Hakon the Good was super into Christianity and spent his life trying to Christianize Norway before being killed in battle by the forces of the amazingly named Eric Bloodaxe. When he died, his court poet composed a poem about his death wherein King Hakon is spirited away by Valkyries and welcomed into Valhalla by Odin. And while Hakon is worried that Odin will hate him for his Christian faith, he instead welcomes him, and the Einherjar honor his warrior's courage. Amusingly, when Eric Bloodaxe was later killed, his equally awesomely named wife Gunhildr, Mother of Kings, supposedly had a similar poem composed where Odin prepares Valhalla and the Einherjar for the arrival of her husband. One can only imagine the awkward dinner conversations. And bonus fun fact, Odin's ghostly host might have been originally based on a real group of warriors attested by Tacitus in his Germania way back in the aughts CE. This group, the Hari, painted their shields and bodies black and attacked on dark nights as a shadowy phantom army to very effectively confound and terrorize their enemies. 8 centuries and a lot of mythologization later, the story of this ghostly shadow army could easily transform into a phantom host in service to Odin. The fact that Einherjar is etymologically connected to Hari supports this theory, although Hari just means warrior and Einherjar just means those who fight alone, so it maybe doesn't support it that much. Anyway, while
I will believe it. I believe. I'll take it. We'll take it. We'll take it. It's crumbs. Could also be a little bit of a stretch, but it's an entertaining stretch. So, go with it.
Scandinavian kings at the turn of the millennium loved them some Valhalla, Grimm thinks that the general opinion might have soured a bit after a few centuries of Christianization. In those early days, the Norse gods were still very familiar. They weren't quite being worshipped, but they still had a very strong presence in the social landscape. Many gods were explicitly connected with natural phenomena, like Thor's anger to the thunder or Odin's night rides with the howling night winds, serving as constant physical reminders of these familiar old figures. But as centuries passed in the new paradigm, the old gods became unfamiliar, even demonic. Grimm thinks the Christianization of Scandinavia never erased the old gods, but instead made them unfamiliar and terrifying, personifications of the wild and the unknown. Odin's nightly rides stopped being a glorious battle charge and a promise of a shining afterlife, and instead became a terrifying army of ghosts. And since Christianity promises a peaceful afterlife for the hallowed dead, by extension, that army of angry ghosts has to be really bad news. Grimm puts this really beautifully in a distinctly creepy way. As the Christian god has not made them his, they fall due to the old heathen one. Basically, since good people get to join the Christian god when they die, the unhallowed, unbaptized, or otherwise bad dead fall into the waiting arms of the old pagan gods and join their host instead. But despite this extremely creepy framing, the Wild Hunt is not always strictly an antagonistic force. One folktale begins with a drunk peasant walking home through the woods. He hears the cry of the Wild Hunt behind him and a voice telling
Get out! Woo!
him to get out of the way, and when he doesn't, the hunt master crashes down out of the sky in front of him. The huntsman tosses a chain at the peasant.
So, you think you are strong?
And challenges him to a game of tug-of-war, but when he takes off into the sky, the peasant quickly ties the chain around a nearby oak. Impressed by the peasant's
He didn't look that heavy.
apparently prodigious strength, or at least weight, the huntsman tries and fails 2 more times, and as a reward for the
Very nice.
peasant's cunning, he butchers a stag and gives him the meat, and the peasant, without any other way to transport it, is forced to carry it in one of his boots. As he walks home with it, the boot becomes heavier and heavier, but he eventually reaches his house, whereupon he finds the boot is now full of gold. General consensus is that this huntsman is Odin, or Wotan if you want to be old High German about it, and the boot full of gold is probably a remnant of a much older story, because it's a little too weirdly specific otherwise. This general format is pretty common in folktales. A mysterious and potentially malevolent supernatural entity challenges the hero to an impossible task, and when they succeed, usually through cunning or trickery, the entity rewards them. But the Wild Hunt specifically seems to have a habit of rewarding people with gifts of gold, specifically gold that doesn't initially look like gold. We'll see more of this later. There's a few other
What's the reasoning behind it? Is there a deeper connection to it that we do know of? Or we got any hypotheses? I don't know enough about Norse folklore to be able to draw upon the hypotheses myself.
consistent themes about the hunt. It's very commonly framed as a karmic punishment for the people caught up in it, usually as a cautionary tale. The stock explanation for why the huntmaster is leading the hunt in the first place is that they used to be some hunt-happy dum-dum who loudly declared that the Christian god can stuff it because hunting is where it's at, and immediately found themselves bound eternally to the phantom wild hunt, cursed never to rest until Judgment Day or something. It's also generally agreed on that if you hear the cry of the wild hunt, it's unwise to mimic it. It might go pretty well for you. Sometimes the hunt appreciates your enthusiasm and leaves you some of what they hunted that night, like a bit of moss or an entire human leg. But sometimes you're just getting their attention, which is a good way to get swept up by the storm and disappeared forever. Or both things could happen, like the tale of the peasant who mimicked the call of the hunt and was instantly killed when they tossed an entire horse flank down his chimney. It's also very common
Okay, do not mimic the wild hunt.
for the hunt leader to ride a white horse, which is interesting because Odin's steed, Sleipnir, is very specifically gray. Now, while the base concept of the wild hunt seems to have originally evolved from Odin and his Einherjar, Odin is not always the huntsman leading it. Although Grimm does believe a lot of the supposed hunt leaders are actually just corruptions or bynames of Odin. For instance, several stories describe the hunt being led by a dead nobleman named Hackelberg or Hackelbaron, which seems to be derived from the Old Norse word Hekla, meaning armored or cloaked one, which he thinks is just an epithet for Odin, corrupted and confused into being another figure entirely. But not every hunt leader is Odin. For one thing, a lot of them are women. One common theme says that the hunt is led by one Frau Gaudin, a noblewoman with 24 daughters who loved hunting more than life itself, and once said that hunting was better than heaven. In a bout of shockingly well-timed karmic retribution, Frau Gaudin's daughters all immediately transform into hunting dogs, and they're whisked up into the sky, doomed to hunt eternally through the night. Oh no! Exactly what we asked for! This is the worst! But Frau Gaudin's wild hunt is a little aesthetically different from the Odin version. For one thing, she doesn't ride a horse, she rides in a carriage. And a common story when she's in charge is that her carriage gets damaged, usually when she rides over a crossroad, and she wakes up a local craftsman and politely asks him to fix it. When he does, she rewards him with a payment that initially appears worthless, like wood shavings or literal dog poop, but when the sun rises, it transmutes into pure gold. Frau Gaudin is also said to be most powerful around the New Year, or the 12 days of Christmas, and sometimes leaves phantom dogs in the houses of people who don't lock up properly. And while yes, a free magic pupper would be amazing, these little guys are actually bad omens that bring misfortune on the household until Frau Gaudin returns to collect them next year.
So, devil puppy. Devil pupper. Devil ghost pupper. Worth it.
Some pretty standard winter is spooky, lock your doors morals on that one. There's another hunt mistress
Worth.
found in Alpine folklore known as Berkta, who's quite different from Gaudin. Her name either means hidden or the bright one, and either translation makes sense, and she's described as being completely swathed in bright white robes. Berkta, like Gaudin, also appears around the 12 days of Christmas, but that's where the similarities end. Gaudin is a stately noblewoman, while Berkta is at best horrifically old and wizened, while some stories paint her as physically monstrous with mismatched limbs and animalistic features. But Berkta isn't just another pretty face. She also cares for the souls of unbaptized children, which ties in well with Grimm's theory that the old gods take the dead that the new god won't touch. Berkta also serves the important role of enforcing taboos, like a ban on spinning during the winter holidays or eating anything but fish and gruel on her feast day. And in Bavarian and Austrian folklore, she supposedly rewarded well-behaved children and servants with silver coins. This kind of ties into the same theme as Odin with the boot full of gold, an intimidating figure punishing transgressions but richly rewarding good behavior. Now, Grimm theorizes that Gaudin and Berkta are actually both offshoots of a very ancient pre-Christian goddess, along with a third folkloric figure, Frau Holly, who Grimm believes most closely resembles the theoretical original figure. Frau Holly, or Holda, sometimes also called Old Mother Frost, is a generally benevolent folkloric figure who sometimes leads a cohort of phantoms and occasionally rewards people with gold, both familiar traits by now. In one popular story that actually doesn't feature the wild hunt, a young girl who lives with her cruel stepmother and stepsister accidentally drops her spindle down a well and jumps in after it, only to find herself transported to an unfamiliar meadow. She finds an oven
Alice in Toasterland? What?
with bread baking, and the bread asks to be taken out before it burns. She obliges, then finds an apple tree that asks her to harvest the apples, which she does. Finally, she comes to a small house with a friendly old woman who calls herself Frau Holly, and says she can stay if she does her housework. Ever obliging, the girl agrees. Frau Holly warns her to be extra diligent shaking out the feather bed because that's what causes snow back in the real world, and the girl dutifully does her job. Eventually, she gets a little bit homesick, and Frau Holly sends her home with the spindle she dropped, along with another gift. Every time she talks, a bit of gold drops out of her mouth. Sounds a bit uncomfortable, honestly, but it's better than what her stepsister gets. When she jumps down the well and tries to earn the same reward without actually helping any of the inanimate objects or doing any of Frau Holly's work, she starts spitting out toads. So Frau Holly is another dual figure. She fits the general folkloric role of rewarding good stuff and punishing bad stuff, often with gold. She's also connected with spinning and weaving, like Berkta, is sometimes said to be the caretaker of dead children, and leads a host of phantom spirits. She has a festival in midwinter, and the other connections to the season are pretty obvious. She literally makes it snow. It's her job. Many folklorists believe she's a relic from a pre-Christian and potentially even pre-Norse divinity, theoretically predating even Odin and company. So according to Grimm's theory, these assorted hunt mistresses, Gaudin, Berkta, Holly, etc., are all offshoots of this ancient winter goddess, which would be dope as hell. Obviously, this is a little hard to confirm, but the three figures do share a lot of similarities: gold, midwinter, spinning and weaving, punishing taboos, and of course, leading a phantom host of the unhallowed dead. Hashtag just girly things. But like I said earlier, the wild hunt is not just a German thing. In Scandinavia, it's called Odin's hunt, which is pretty self-explanatory and follows from the Einherjar.
No, I'm gonna need it explained in extreme depth. Extreme depth.
Origins we already covered. But in Old English, it was called the Herla thing, meaning Herla's assembly. Well, who's Herla? Herla? I barely know her. Okay, anyway. Well, aside from being probably...
I'll appreciate the joke. Red, say it again.
Well, who's Herla? Herla? I barely know her. Okay, anyway. Well, aside from being probably secretly Odin, which at this point is kind of a given, Herla is a legendary king of the Britons, the pre-Saxon Celtic inhabitants of England. According to 12th century English/Welsh author Walter Map, King Herla, modernized from his Old English title Herla Kinning, strikes a deal with a dwarf. The dwarf will attend his wedding, and then 1 year later, he'll attend the dwarf's wedding. The dwarf brings wedding gifts and provisions and is an absolute model guest, and then a year later, Herla travels underground to the dwarf king's realm and spends 3 days at the wedding party. When he leaves, the king gives him a small bloodhound and warns him not to get off his horse until the dog does. Free dogs? Best wedding ever. Herla and his band leave the dwarf king's realm, but the hound stays on the horse. When Herla asks a nearby shepherd how his queen is doing, he's shocked to find that the shepherd is a Saxon, not a Briton, and the Saxons have ruled the land for over 200 years now. Apparently, 3 days in the dwarf king's realm equaled 300 years out here. Some of the men leap off their horses in shock and immediately age 300 years and crumble to dust. Stuck in his saddle and displaced in time, all Herla can do is ride eternally, trapped in an endless unlife thanks to the world's worst case of supernatural jet lag. But Herla's story doesn't end there. This concept of an undead or demonic eternal wanderer was quite popular, and in the 11th century, French monk and chronicler Orderic Vitalis used the phrase familia herlikin to describe a demonic host pursuing a hapless monk, led by a terrifying masked giant. This was the first official attestation of the French version of the Wild Hunt, which was a bit spicier than the Germanic version. The Helikin leading the hunt was an emissary of the devil himself, and his host of demons hunted down the souls of the damned, rather than being those wayward souls themselves. This demonic figure later evolved into a stock character in French passion plays, and then evolved further with the advent of the 16th century commedia dell'arte and the introduction of the masked motley figure of the Harlequin. Still a bit of a devilish trickster, but a lot less overtly malevolent than the wild hunt he used to lead. So, the Harlequin stock character is Odin. All roads lead to Odin, apparently. Well, that's not strict.
Sexy Odin costume this year?
True. While the Germanic wild hunt seems directly derived from Odin and the Einherjar, or possibly the pre-Norse theoretical Frau Halle winter goddess, the concept of a nighttime host of ghosts or demons is actually pretty widespread. The Welsh variant of the wild hunt is sometimes led by Arawn, the king of the underworld we talked about way back when we covered Push. Since we already knew he liked hunting, that part isn't really a surprise, and it's even explicitly part of his job description. He and his hounds hunt lost souls and drive them to Anun, making this a surprisingly benevolent form of the wild hunt. It's basically supernatural cleanup duty rather than an inherently malevolent ghost tornado. In some versions, Arawn's hunting activity even peaks around the 12 days of Christmas, like Gowden and Berkta. But he's also not always alone. Sometimes the hunt is also led by Maut i Nos, a crone who drives the hounds onward with her constant wailing. Similar to the Germanic version, sometimes she's retconned as a dead noblewoman who got herself karmically permabanned from heaven for saying it probably sucks up there if there's no hunting allowed. Irish and Scottish folklore has the sluach, Gesundheit, a word that just means throng or army, but describes a host of very nasty spirits of the restless dead. Considered really bad news, much worse than the generally benevolent but still dangerous Seelie Fae or even the actively malicious Unseelie Fae. The sluach were chaotic, unpredictable, and known for spiriting people away in the night, the kind of thing you hide under the covers about. This is another version of the wild hunt where the main way to stay safe is to stay indoors, close your windows, and hope they don't notice you. But the concept of nightly ghost armies isn't just a European thing. For instance, Hawaii has the Night Marchers, a procession of ghostly warriors beating drums and blowing conch shells like they're marching to war. While this sounds a lot more regal and orderly than most similarly spooky ghost armies, the suggested response is the same. Get inside, lock the doors, hope they don't take an interest in you, and do not attract their attention. Not showing the appropriate levels of respect is generally considered a good way to get vaporized by bolts of divine retribution, and in a lot of the cases, the appropriate level of respect involves deliberately averting your eyes and not looking at it. On a similar note, Japan has the Hyaki Yagyo, Gesundheit, the night parade of 100 demons, a folklore motif describing a massive horde of demons, spirits, phantoms, yokai, and basically every other spooky specter in the area. Sometimes it's a little more like an orderly procession, sometimes it's full-on pandemonium, but it's always bad news, and like most other ghost tornadoes, best avoided to prevent death or ghost kidnapping. Now, perhaps the most obvious question at this point is, why do we have so many dang ghost tornadoes? This is bizarrely widespread, and while a concept as simple as ghost makes sense worldwide, a cacophonic horde of the restless, unhallowed dead trapped in an eternal hunt across the endless sky is a bit more specific than dead but hasn't got the memo. Well, the most likely answer is kinda mundane. Most wild hunt myths specifically describe the hunt as invisible, but very, very loud. Odin's hunt is specifically equated with the howling wind that plays through the forest, which does often sound like howling or screaming. And over in Wales, Arawn's dogs barking in the night sky is apparently, no joke, based on the eerie sound of migratory geese which would fly through the area in the winter months. When the night is dark and full of really loud, weird noises that shake your roof and blow your windows open, it's not much of a logical leap to assume assume you just got blasted by a host of very inconsiderate, noisy spirits or ghosts. In the same way that thunder and lightning were pretty much universally assigned gods worldwide, creepy, howling nighttime winds were also a universal experience, and a good reason to stay indoors on wild nights.
Happy Halloween! Remember to wear a mask so malevolent spirits get confused about your identity and don't afflict you with terrible curses like a plague or something. There. Always maintain adequate social distance when being abducted by a phantom host of restless, unhallowed spirits. Someone needs to tell Frau Garden that it's a social faux pas to give someone a dog for Christmas. Is it? Well, I guess, yeah, because you don't want to give them a dog that they may not feel like they're capable of taking care of, etc., etc. This was the Halloween special of the Wild Hunt. I'm surprised that she didn't at least mention maybe the modern concept of the Wild Hunt, which largely like what the perception is like. I'm curious, like really how much modern perception of the Wild Hunt is shaped by The Witcher. I'm surprised she didn't talk about that, like, because that's what she would talk about with the werewolves and vampires, their modern iteration. Didn't do that for the Wild Hunt. She didn't do it. Thought she would have, at least mention like what modern stories detail the Wild Hunt. I don't know. That would have been nice. But it is what it is. That was the Halloween special, The Wild Hunt, by Overly Sarcastic Productions. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Have a good Halloween. See you in the next video. Peace.